What are the challenges of sculpting eyes? And really, what are we aiming to achieve when we're doing it? Before we zoom into the specificity of eyes, it's important to consider the sculpture as a whole. What does it mean to sculpt somebody? Modeling a realistic portrait is emulating a physical likeness in a new material, translated through personal perceptual experience and manifested through skill. So let's unpack that a little bit. Modeling a realistic portrait is emulating a physical likeness in a new material. So you're copying something that exists, but you're recreating it into a new physical form. And in this particular case, I'm using clay to recreate the physical form of my wife's likeness. And I like clay for this process because the malleability makes it an excellent material for modeling. And there's also a certain intimacy inherent to clay. And while we use tools to extend the capabilities of our hands, the proximity to clay and the artist is intimate. The clay responds to an artist's touch, and much of the time sculpting is spent in direct contact with the artist's hands. Modeling a realistic portrait is emulating a physical likeness in a new material, translated through personal perceptual experience. This isn't a 3D scan. This isn't a mold taken off of somebody's face directly. This is something that's been translated through the hands of somebody else's perceived experience. And there's something about the end result that captures the human-to-human connection when it passes through the perception of the artist. Modeling a realistic portrait is emulating a physical likeness in a new material, translated through personal perceptual experience and manifested through skill. So manifested through skill. The resulting sculpture and how well it achieves likeness is predicated on the commitment that I have to this process and developing a relationship with the material of clay. But it also contains my fallibility, the reality that I'm not going to achieve exact likeness because I am, in fact, human. And there's sort of a poignancy in fallibility that will be manifest in the end result. So there's also a characteristic of sculpture that it is inherently real. It's not an illusion per se. Like, it might mimic, represent, or act as a metaphor, but sculpture is governed by physics in ways that illusion-based media like painting, photography are not. That's not to say that other media are breaking laws of physics, but they can create a perceptual experience that escapes reality. Imagination is powerful. So what relevance does all this have to sculpting the eyes? Eyes are, of course, physical. There's an actual eyeball and a physical structure in our skull. But they also contain within them the paintings that are the iris. This characteristic produces a challenge. How is the physical nature of clay manipulated to emulate the perception of color? Now, there are methods that could be used to mimic the eye. You could do something as simple as painting the eyeball, or you could get more advanced and create a glass eye that more closely captures the nature of the human's eye. Or a sculptor could decide to make physical what was an illusion, sort of invert the situation. To use light and shadow to represent the shift of hue and eventual darkness that is the pupil. This strategy is an inversion. It flips the experience we generally have with the eye. So what is that experience? What are we looking for when we gaze into the eyes of another? Some sort of insight, the other's intention? Are we really looking through these portals in an attempt to see the soul of the other? Maybe it comes down to connection. We want to see and be seen by the person across from us. Is it possible to capture some fraction of this experience in a sculpture? As I carve bits of clay away in an effort to capture the gaze of my wife, can I also capture anything of the emotional connection we share? I'm reminded of a particular moment, a time we sat across from each other in a quaint European cafe, and she asked me,
"What do you see when you look at me?"
I paused for just a moment, and I looked into her eyes and I said, "My future." I was downstairs making a mold. Look at this. I've got plaster everywhere. And I remembered I needed to record the rest of this video. I have to say, this is a true story. I really said that to Kati, but honestly, this was probably the smoothest I've ever been in my dating history. Like, I don't think I've ever said anything to a woman that was so the right thing at the right time. And I think it must be the case still, because One of the first things Kati said when she saw the finished sculpture was, "I think you sculpted my grandma." So maybe subconsciously, I still look into her eyes and I see our future together as we get even older together. But that was the video. I'm going to throw a out clip at the end and get back downstairs to make this mold.
What do you see when you look at me?
And I paused for just a moment, looked into her eyes. The future. No, shit, it's my future.